So I first saw Star Wars when I was probably 6 years old. It had been out for a while at that point, but it was new to me. And I was enamored with the main character, Luke Skywalker, who looked vaguely similar to me, who grew up in a very dusty part of the world, vaguely similar to me, who had kind of shaggy hair, vaguely similar to me, who had family issues, vaguely similar to me. And I was enthralled by his struggle against the Empire, that he becomes part of this resistance crew against the mighty Empire. And if you don't know anything about Star Wars, let me explain the Empire to you. It's very hard to wrap your mind around how this could ever happen anywhere. But imagine that there is a government that seeks to inform a kind of uniformity across different kinds of peoples and wants everyone to act the same and maybe speak the same language, but actually really only privileges people who look a certain way. If you've ever seen the Star Wars movies, you'll notice that everyone in the Empire is a white man. Not very subtle. Imagine the Empire sets up a kind of economic system that requires the labor of people who they put at the bottom of the system, and requires that labor, often uncompensated or undercompensated, to make the people at the top prosper. I know this is hard to imagine, but go with me here. Imagine that they have technology that is so advanced that it could literally create a world where everyone has what they need. But instead, they use that technology to build a gigantic weapon that is literally capable of destroying the planets. I know it's hard to imagine. Against that empire and the might of the mighty galactic empire in the Star Wars universe, there's born something that is originally called the Rebel Alliance, the Rebellion. It later comes to be known the Resistance. So the Star Wars movies, there were 3 original ones, and then they made 3 prequels that happened before, and then they made 3 sequels that happened after those 3 original ones. I'm telling you, in my house, we only acknowledge 8 of those movies. We do not acknowledge the 9th one, The Rise of Skywalker, because it was garbage. So just know that going in. If you're a big Star Wars nerd like me, we stand firm. And the reason I say that is because the story of Star Wars is basically a story of how small individual acts of rebellion compound on one another and create a movement for change against a global industrial superpower. So that's very exciting. And the story of Star Wars is a story about rebellion. And depending on which side of the line you're on, rebellion's not always a good thing, right? I'll give you an example. I grew up in Texas, and so I've learned my entire life about the Texas Revolution, where we fought for independence against the Mexican government, the tyrannical Mexican government, that we were the rebellion. The Texas Revolution, we called it, the Revolutionary War. Then I went to college in Virginia, and I was sitting in a Latin American studies class, and my professor was reading something about, we were talking about Central American history, and she talked about the Texas Rebellion. I was like, well, that sounds awesome. I've never heard of that. What is the Texas Rebellion? It says it's a period from 1836 when the Texan enslavers fought against the Mexican government. I thought, oh, that is a spin on that story I had not heard. Oh, so what does it mean if we were acting more like the Empire when we thought we were the Rebel Alliance? And like many pop culture references, the story of Star Wars can be taken in a different way. For lots of young white men to see the story of a young white man who goes on to be the hero, that's a story that can be imbibed, where you can only think of yourself as the hero. And you cannot imagine a situation where you were actually the Empire, where you think that you are fighting the good cause, but you use terms like fighting for law and order, fighting for family values, traditional family values. That story can become twisted. And this is where resistance becomes really important. And the story of rebellion becomes really important. Because what the Gospel of Star Wars talks about through the guise of different characters. And as the movies have gone off in the 1970s, those characters become less white and less male over time, which we're all very excited about. They lift up the stories of individual people. And I've said that we don't talk about that last movie, and here's why. Because in the last movie, you find out that the young woman who is the new protagonist of the newer movies, you think that she is just someone nondescript. No one special. She's not a king or a queen or a princess. Just someone from somewhere, from a dusty part of the world, who can grow up to join with friends, to fight for love, and to change the world. And in the last movie, you find out that that's not what the director intended, and that's why we don't talk about it. So in my mind, she's still someone from nowhere, and anyone from anywhere can become what's called a Jedi, right? Which is the warrior monk able to use something called the Force, which is kind of like magic, but more like faith. That anyone can grow up to be important and to change the history and the fate of the world. And if you have that belief, and if you have that hope on your side, then you are part of the resistance. And if you're working for power or security or safety, you might be on the side of the empire. So when we talk about the rebellion, the rebel alliance, later known as resistance, it's a wonderful line that says, rebellions are built on hope. Rebellions are built on hope. In the face of the giant planet-killing government, rebellions are built on hope. So keep that in mind. The story of someone from a dusty part of the world who could grow up, join with a small group of people to help change the world, built on hope. When you watch the Star Wars movies, or like me, read the Star Wars books and play the Star Wars video games and listen to the Star Wars podcasts and all of that, you're reminded that it's actually a vast universe, a long time ago in a galaxy or universe far, far away. And that there are lots of different kinds of people. And the story of the empire, the story of empire for us, is this refusal to allow for that kind of diversity in its people. That there can only be one way, the empire's way. And oftentimes that way is exemplified by people who look like me, right? So when people try to rebel against that one way, the only response from empire is to try and crush that dissent in whatever way possible. The only response empire has is more oppression, more laws. Carrie Fisher, who played Princess Leia, may she rest in peace, has a wonderful line from the original Star Wars movie talking about this idea. She says to one of the Imperial officials, the more you tighten your grip, the more people will slip through your fingers. She's speaking from a place of righteous anger, but also a place of hope. The more the empire tightens its grip, the more people will slip through its fingers. So when we look at what's going on today, especially when it comes to people who may be outside of the mold of that one unifying identity that so many people will lift up as traditional family values, perhaps. When we look at all of the legislation that is aimed at trans children, at anyone who is deemed to be outside of what's accepted, that is empire tightening its fist. And if you listen to the voices of the prophets who are being targeted by those legislation, the people who are part of the resistance, part of the rebel alliance, they recognize that too. There's a common phrase that's lifted up: there has never been a world without trans people, and there never will be. that it's not something that you can crush away. No matter how big the space laser is, no matter how many bills you pass. But that doesn't mean that people won't get hurt, that people won't die from it. And that's a very real reality. When I was watching the Star Wars movies, I didn't really wrestle with that. It was sad when the people in the starfighters got blown up. It was sad when people got shot with the cartoonish lasers and fell down. But when I was a little kid, I couldn't wrestle with that reality. But as we all grow up, we recognize there are real consequences to this. And for the people who make these laws, it's almost like they're on a space station far, far away, and they're removed from the pain that these things cause. You with me? So how do we respond to that? If we want to be part of the resistance, I think everyone here pretty much pro-Rebel Alliance, I think I can guess. If you're part of the empire and you really want to be part of the empire, let's talk afterwards. But if you want to be part of the resistance, what do we do? What do we do here in Pennsylvania where we have not seen that quite yet? How do we stand in solidarity? What actions can we take more than just listening to a sermon on Sundays? So it starts with little things, right? Part of being the resistance is recognizing that there's more of us than there are of them. There's more of us than there are of them. I'm trying to be very careful with my language here about who is them, because in reality, it is actually a very, very small number of people. There are lots of people who will go along with it because that's what they've been taught or told their entire lives, especially people who are from dusty parts of the world. But the them is actually very small. And we have these systems that are set up to help us engage with those people. So what is called for us to do is to find out where we fit in the Rebel Alliance. Because that's the story of Star Wars, if you get really deep into it. Not everyone can be a Jedi wielding a laser sword and storming the Death Star and blowing it up from the inside. Not everyone can be an ace fighter pilot flying into the guts of this giant metal structure and blowing it up from the inside. Because as cool as that is, a lot of people die in those things. Where do we fit in with the resistance? How do we use our gifts and talents to help stand in solidarity with our trans siblings, with people who are marginalized by empire? In our newsletter, we sent out a list from the Side with Love campaign, which is the Unitarian Universalist Association's prophetic witness group. And depending on where you are, right, it's different. If you're living in red states, it's different than if you're in blue states. If you're in a big city, it's different than if you're in the country. But one thing that we can all do, if we can't take one big swing and blow up the Death Star all at once, is we can do the little things. So I want us to be real honest with ourselves. And I will be very honest. I didn't think about trans siblings before a few years ago. I didn't know. I'm from a dusty part of the world. But now I know better. Because I know better. Because people in this room, people I care about, are part of the trans community, are part of the queer community, are part of marginalized communities. If I want to be part of the Rebel Alliance, we're all in it together. One thing that affects them may not affect me for a while, but the fist is tightening, and that is the only response. It eventually comes for everyone. And the tighter the fist clenches, the more slip through. So if I'm able to slip through, right, then it's incumbent on me to use whatever I have to be part of this resistance. So what would it look like for this community? to take a very public stance on trans rights. It might look like writing letters to the editor of our local papers, which I'm sure will be accepted for the most part. It means being very public in your own families, in our own families, about where we stand. And that's when it can be hard. To live your faith out loud when it causes disruptions with the other people you love, that's very hard. It might look like lobbying to our local government, to our state government, to our national government. There's a place for that. It might look like showing up physically in person in solidarity with marginalized peoples. It might look like hosting something like a drag brunch here or drag story time. It might look like yarn bombing our tree outside with colors of the trans flag, the pride flag. It might look like hanging more symbols outside to let people know that we are a safe space, that we are a safe place. There are lots of ways to be part of the resistance. But here's what I don't want. Because it's so easy for me. I'm an Enneagram 8, and if you know what that means, it means I love to have something to fight against. It is so easy for me to get so angry about all of this. And sometimes that anger leads to inaction, and I just get, And sometimes it leads to a little too much action, right? The Han Solo way of doing things, if you're familiar. Or the Poe Dameron way of doing things, if you're familiar. And that anger, if you're familiar with Star Wars, that anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. And suffering leads to the dark side. The dark side of the force, of faith, of magic, of whatever, of life. That taking the path of just always being against something and always talking about them, that leads to hate. It has to. So in episode 8, the 8th movie, the last movie in my mind, right? One of the characters says to a young guy who is trying to make this big, hateful, angry sacrifice. He can't feel anything else other than hate. And she stops him. She says, "Dummy, that's not how we win. We don't win by destroying what we hate. We win by saving what we love." For the trans people in our congregation and our communities, for those we love, we win by saving those we love, by making this place a safe and healing space, by making it a welcoming, a radically inclusive, radically hospitable place, so that anyone who comes through those doors is welcome to join the Rebel Alliance. And they know that this is a place where they can heal and rest and be loved. We win by not by destroying what we hate, but by saving what we love. My final piece is very simple. You might be saying, that sounds really good, but that also sounds like a lot of work. And it is. It is work to learn people's pronouns and to use them. It is work to understand different ways of moving in the world, different ways of loving people. It's work. And it's necessary. It is loving. And it is necessary. It is hard. And it is necessary. Last Star Wars quote, I promise. When you come face to face with things that are hard, but are necessary, things that will build community, things that will make love come alive, things that will embrace all souls, things that will nurture wholeness, you can say, we'll try. And we will. We'll try. There's a great Jedi master. His name was Yoda. And you all know what he would say, I think, even if you're not a Star Wars fan. Say, no, there is no try. Do or do not. Do or do not. There is no try. When it comes to being radically hospitable, when it comes to welcoming trans folks to being in solidarity, we can do or we can do not. We can be about it or not. It's a choice. But there is no try, especially for the people who can slip through, like me. Trying is not enough. Friends, may we do with love. May we be part of the Rebel Alliance. May we resist against empire by saving and caring for those who we love. May it be so, and may that force be with us. Amen. Would you like to ask for money?
Now is the time when we collect our offering of financial resources for the good of this community, for the growth of this community. We know there are many ways to give back to this congregation, and we encourage you to find a way that works for you. For giving of financial support, your money or checks put in the plate today will be used to fund everyday operation of this congregation. Any pocket change or other money that you designate for change